My daughter called me at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, and I knew something was wrong before she said a single word. That silence on the line, 3, maybe 4 seconds of it, told me everything. "Daddy," she finally said. Her voice was small. She never calls me Daddy anymore. She's 32 years old. "Where are you?" I asked. "Mercy General, the one off Highway 9. Dad, please don't call anyone. Don't tell anyone where you're going." She hung up before I could ask why. "I want to tell you a little about who I am because it matters. My name is Ira, and I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years as a high school principal in Clarksville, Tennessee, long enough to retire with a decent pension and a building named after nobody in particular, just like me. I'm a widower. My wife, Josephine, passed 6 years ago from ovarian cancer. She was the kind of woman you spend your whole life trying to deserve, and I never quite managed it, but I tried my best. My daughter is the best thing either of us ever did. She married into a wealthy family, old money, regional, old money, which has its own particular brand of arrogant. Her husband's people had been developing real estate across Middle Tennessee for 3 generations. His mother, Odessa, ran a prestigious arts foundation. She appeared in every glossy magazine that Clarksville and Nashville could produce. She wore her silver hair in a way that suggested it had been chosen deliberately, like everything about her had been curated to project dignity and permanence. The first time Odessa met me, she smiled the way people smile when they unwrap a gift and find exactly what they suspected they'd find. Not pleased, not surprised, just confirming. My daughter had been with her husband 4 years at that point. I noticed things. I pretended not to. Mercy General was 40 minutes away. I drove it in 32. When I found my daughter in a curtained bay in the emergency room, I stood in the doorway for a moment because I barely recognized her. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. There was a cut above her right eyebrow that someone had closed with butterfly strips. Her bottom lip was split. She held one arm pressed against her chest, and the way she held it told me immediately that something was broken. "Who did this?" I asked. I kept my voice level. 35 years in a building full of teenagers taught me not to let my face show what's happening inside. She looked at the curtain instead of at me. My mother-in-law told me my husband wanted her to take me to see a new property, a surprise. She swallowed. We got out of the car and she had something in her hand. I don't know what. I woke up in the ditch alongside the road. Corinne. She said I had no place in their family, that whatever I thought I'd found, I hadn't found anything, that women like me don't find things. She paused. That my kind never had and never would. I knew what that meant. I've known what that meant since I was 7 years old, and a boy at school told me the same thing in different words. "There's something else," she said. She finally looked at me. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant. I haven't told anyone yet. We were waiting." The world did something strange then. It narrowed and expanded at the same time. She must have seen my face change, because she reached for my hand with her good one. "The baby is okay," they checked. She pressed her lips together until the trembling stopped. "Daddy," she knew. I told her in the car, and she laughed. She said a child with my blood in it would ruin everything they had built, that she wasn't going to allow that to happen. The hospital wanted to admit her. I told them she had been evaluated for concussion and needed to go home. The attending physician was skeptical, but I have spent 3 decades talking calmly to people who don't want to listen, and eventually they gave me the discharge papers. I did not take her home. Not to my house, and certainly not to the house she shared with her husband. I drove 40 minutes in the other direction, to a motel outside Dixon that I'd passed 1,000 times without ever stopping. I paid cash. I left my phone in the car. She slept while I sat in the chair by the window, thinking about the call I needed to make. His name was Quinlan, Quince, to the people who had known him since his 20s. We'd been in the army together, which sounds more dramatic than it was, 2 men who'd mostly processed supply paperwork and driven trucks through Germany. But the friendship was real and durable. After his service, Quince had gone into private investigation. Not the theatrical kind you see on television. Mostly insurance fraud, workplace theft, the occasional missing person. He was methodical, he was careful, and he knew people I didn't. I walked to the parking lot of a Waffle House up the road to make the call. "I need your help," I said, not on the phone, in person. He arrived the next morning at 7 with 2 cups of coffee and the same quiet expression he'd carried for 40 years. He examined my daughter without ceremony. Not as a patient, but as a problem he was going to solve. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning." My daughter had been helping her husband with documentation for his mother's foundation, the Ridgemont Arts Foundation, which moved millions annually into grants for regional artists and educational programs. Her husband sat on the board nominally. He signed whatever his mother put in front of him and attended the dinners. "I was reviewing 3 years of grant disbursements," Corinne said, "and the awarded amounts didn't match the public records. Organizations that received large grants didn't appear to exist. I tried to verify them. The addresses were vacant lots, post office boxes, companies registered in Nevada with no employees, no history." Quince nodded slowly. "Shell recipients." I asked her directly. I thought there might be an explanation. She stayed completely calm at first, said it was a complex accounting structure for tax purposes. Then she suggested we drive out to look at a property so she could explain it privately. She looked at her hands. That's when I knew. What my daughter had managed before she got into that car was photograph 37 pages of financial records on her phone. The phone was in her coat pocket. Odessa apparently hadn't thought to take it. She'd assumed, most likely, that my daughter would not survive a night in a roadside ditch in October. She hadn't accounted for a concrete contractor driving home at dusk, who saw tire marks in the gravel and stopped. Quince spent 2 days on his offline laptop, making calls from a borrowed phone. On the 3rd morning, he spread his notes across the motel bed and walked us through what he'd assembled. The Ridgemont Arts Foundation had operated for 9 years. Roughly 40% of disbursements could not be verified as reaching any legitimate recipient. Conservative estimate, $4 million. The real number was likely higher. "That's not the worst of it," he said. "Tell me," I said. 2.5 years ago, your daughter was in a single vehicle accident. She told police she'd overcorrected on a wet road. The official report closed the case. My daughter went very still across the room. "The mechanical failure that caused the accident was a compromised rear brake line," Quince continued, choosing his words carefully. "That particular failure does not occur on its own in a vehicle of that age and maintenance history." "She lost a baby in that accident," I said. "Yes." I looked at my daughter. She was staring at a fixed point on the wall, and her hand had moved to rest over her stomach. The gesture I had been watching her make all week without remarking on it. "My husband had the car serviced the week before," she said quietly. "His mother's mechanic. She recommended him specifically." "Did your husband know," I asked, "about the brake line?" She was quiet for a long time. "He came to the hospital and he cried," she finally said. "He held my hand, and then he went home and called his mother for 2 hours. I thought he was devastated." A pause. "Now I don't know how to think about it." That was the moment I understood what we were truly dealing with. Not a woman who had lost her temper. A woman who had been operating methodically for years, who considered the removal of inconvenient people to be a reasonable decision in service of the family she had decided to protect. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee as the son of a man who worked the county records office and a woman who did alterations out of our kitchen. We had enough. We were not people anyone photographed. Odessa had decided from the moment she met me at that dinner table 4 years ago that my daughter was something to be corrected, a stain that had appeared on the fabric of what she was building and that she intended, in her own time and her own way, to remove. I have never in my life raised my hand to another person in anger. I have understood, however, in very specific moments, exactly how much it costs to keep that hand at your side. "We need to talk to my father-in-law," my daughter said. Her husband. He keeps his distance from the foundation. He runs the construction division. He doesn't know any of this. She looked at me steadily. But there is a line he will not cross, and I believe we've just located it. Getting him to agree to a meeting was easier than I expected, and that worried me briefly. But the man had spent 40 years building something tangible, actual structures, roads, projects that altered a landscape in ways you could see and touch. He was in his late 60s, thick through the shoulders, with the deliberate movements of someone who learned to slow himself down after spending decades moving fast. We met at a diner off the interstate that none of us had any reason to frequent. Quince sat 2 tables away and did not look at us once. I set 3 folders on the table in front of my son-in-law's father. I let him read without speaking. That's another thing 35 years of principling teaches you. When to talk and when to let the evidence carry itself. He turned pages for a long time. The diner filled and emptied around us. He did not look up. "The foundation," he said at last. "Yes. This has been verified by 2 people who have no reason to fabricate it." He closed the folder. He looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman was working a stroller into a minivan, methodical and patient. "And the accident," he said, 2 years ago. "The brake line was compromised. The vehicle had been serviced by your wife's mechanic the week prior." He was quiet for a long time, the deliberate quiet of a man doing serious work inside himself. "My son," he said, not quite a question. "He may not have known about the brake line," I said. That was the most charitable, honest thing I could offer. "What he knew about the foundation, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that my daughter is 32 years old and 12 weeks pregnant, and your wife left her in a roadside ditch in October and drove herself home." He turned and looked at me directly, for the first time since we'd sat down. "What do you want?" he said. "I want my daughter safe, permanently. I want a divorce settlement that reflects 4 years of her life and the losses she has already sustained. And I want your wife to understand that if she ever approaches my daughter or my grandchild again, every document in those folders goes to the district attorney's office, 3 investigative journalists, and every board of directors your family name is attached to. And in return, we don't make that call today." He looked back at the parking lot. The woman with the stroller had gotten her child buckled in and was circling to the driver's side. "I need until Friday," he said. "Thursday," I said. He nodded once and left without touching his coffee. Quince stayed with us that week. He was good company in the way that men who have known each other for a long time can be. Comfortable with silence, not compelled to fill it. On Wednesday, Corinne and I sat on the small motel porch in the cold afternoon air. She talked about her husband the way people sometimes have to talk about something painful. Not to condemn it, but to understand how much of it had been real. "He is not a bad person," she said. "I still believe that. But he has never once in his life stood between his mother and something she wanted, and I keep coming back to the same question." She looked at the trees at the edge of the parking lot. Is a not bad person who does nothing different from a person who does the damage themselves. I thought about it honestly. In terms of the result, I said not much. She nodded. "My grandfather used to say something, 'Yours.' I remember you telling me when I was little. He said you can judge a man by what he protects." My grandfather had said that. He was talking about his own father, who had stood on a porch with a shotgun during a particular night in 1955 when men came to encourage the family to reconsider their address. His father had not moved. No one came up the steps. "I want this baby to have that," my daughter said. Her hand rested on her stomach. "Whatever that quality is." "It isn't something you hand someone," I said. "It's something you demonstrate." She looked at me sideways. "Are you telling me I already have it?" I thought about my daughter at 7, falling off a bicycle at the bottom of the driveway, standing up, examining her palms, and riding back to the top of the hill without making a sound. I thought about her at 16, attending a school board meeting alone to argue that the history curriculum was leaving things out. I thought about her calling me from a hospital at 11:15 at night and telling me to come without explaining why. "No," I said, "I'm telling you that you already know you have it." Alfred called Thursday morning as agreed. Whatever conversations had taken place between Wednesday evening and that call, I was not part of them and did not ask. He was a private man, and the reckoning inside that marriage was one I had no particular need to witness. What I knew: Odessa departed for a property in the Carolinas she had evidently owned for years in her own name, which indicated the planning had not been entirely recent. She resigned from the foundation's board, citing health. The letter of resignation was dated 2 days after my daughter had been left in a ditch on County Road 7. The divorce moved faster than I thought possible when one party has resources and the other has 3 folders of documentation. My daughter signed papers in a hotel conference room, with an attorney Quince recommended. She received the marital home transferred to her name, a settlement that would keep her and her child comfortable for years, and a written guarantee from attorneys she had not hired herself that Odessa would have no contact with her life or the life of the child. My son-in-law did not contest anything. He signed where he was told to sign. I don't know what his father said to him or whether he arrived at any understanding of what his long silence had cost. I chose not to ask. Some doors I made a deliberate decision not to open. My granddaughter was born on a Thursday in April. She arrived 3 days early, impatient from the start, which I chose to interpret as a favorable sign. I was in the waiting room with Quince, who had driven 4 hours to be there and spent most of the labor borough telling me a case story from Murfreesboro that I could not follow because I kept watching the door. When the nurse appeared, she said, "Mr. Ira, she's asking for you." My daughter was exhausted in the profound and specific way that I imagine only that experience can produce. She was propped against pillows with the baby on her chest, and when I came through the door, she looked at me with an expression I don't have a single adequate word for. Not happiness, exactly, something older and more serious than happiness. "Come see her," she said. I sat on the edge of the bed. The baby was small and dark-haired and had the alert, slightly indignant expression that all newborns seem to arrive with, as though they've just concluded a great argument and haven't fully decided to concede. "I decided on a name," my daughter said. "Tell me." "Josephine." She looked at me. "If that's all right." Josephine, my wife's name. A woman who had been gone 6 years and whose absence I had managed, mostly, by keeping myself occupied and avoiding quiet rooms. A woman who had believed, without qualification or caveat, that whatever came at this family could be handled because we were built to handle things. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. "She would have liked that," I finally said. "She would have liked all of it," my daughter said. "She would have been furious first, and then she would have fixed it, and then she would have liked all of it." That is exactly right. That is Josephine to the last detail. Alfred came to the hospital. He knocked and waited for permission to enter. He stood at a careful distance and looked at the baby with the expression of a man who has decided to be grateful for what he still has. "What is her name?" he asked. "Josephine," Corinne said. He nodded. He set an envelope on the bedside table and told her to open it whenever she felt ready. Then he said he was sorry and that he understood it was not adequate and he left without staying longer than he'd said he would. I found that I respected him for all three of those things. We moved my daughter into a small brick house outside of Clarksville in June. Not the one she had shared with her husband, a different one, on a street lined with old trees where people wave from their porches and grow tomatoes in the backyard. The nursery had yellow curtains my daughter made herself from fabric she'd ordered. I had not known she could sew. There are things about your children that you spend a lifetime discovering. I came over most mornings, coffee on the back porch while Josephine slept. My daughter at the kitchen table, working, the particular quiet of a woman who has made peace with where she is. One evening in August, I sat in the backyard watching Josephine in the grass, not yet walking, but determined to evaluate every blade individually with full scientific seriousness. And I thought about my own grandfather. He was not a complicated man. He knew what he was protecting. That knowledge passed down through the generations of my family in ways I cannot fully account for or diagram. It isn't instruction. It's more like temperature, something you absorb without knowing it, until the moment arrives when you need it, and you find it already there. Odessa had used words like bloodline, like purity. Like, my daughter's very existence was a form of contamination that needed to be corrected before it could spread. Those words have a specific history in this country, and she knew exactly what history she was invoking when she reached for them. But here is what she misunderstood, and what I want to say plainly. The blood in my family is the blood of people who were told, in more ways and more places than I have time to list, that they did not belong, that they were lesser, that they should make themselves smaller, quieter, or simply disappear. We did not disappear. We built schools and raised children, and stood in doorways when we needed to stand in doorways. We drove 40 minutes in the dark when someone called and said, "Come," without explaining why. We sat across tables from powerful men with folders of evidence and said, clearly, and without apology, what we required. My granddaughter was sitting in the grass pulling at something with both fists, entirely focused, entirely herself. She looked up at me once, and the expression on her face, at 4 months old, was already unmistakably her grandmother's. That particular combination of curiosity and certainty, as though the world is interesting, and she intends to have opinions about it. She has no idea yet what she comes from. She doesn't know about County Road 7, or a compromised brake line, or a folder of documents in a motel room, or a man who made calls from a borrowed phone, in a parking lot on a cold October night. One day she'll know all of it. And when she does, I want her to understand that none of it broke us. Not a single piece of it. Because we are the people who don't break. Not because we are invincible, but because we have spent generations learning, in the only way you truly learn anything, that getting back up is not the exceptional thing. It is simply the thing we do. That is the inheritance I have to offer her. Josephine, my wife, her namesake, would say it is the only inheritance that lasts. I have always believed her. I expect I always will.